Marcus Wynn was 39 years old, and for 11 years he had been the kind of man his wife's colleagues looked through at company events. He drove a decade-old Ford F-150 with a cracked rear bumper. He wore the same 3 sport coats on rotation. When Danielle's coworkers asked what he did, she would smile and say, "He works in logistics," and the conversation would move on before anyone thought to ask a follow-up question. That suited him just fine. What none of them knew, what Danielle herself did not know, was that 3 weeks before the morning she walked into her downtown Charlotte office building and ordered security to remove her own husband from the lobby. Marcus had quietly become the sole owner of the company she managed. The acquisition had cost him $4.2 million and taken 14 months to arrange, and he had arranged all of it without saying a single word inside their shared house on Arbor Ridge Drive. He had not done it to trap her. He had done it because the evidence he had gathered over the prior 8 months left him no other choice but to protect what was his. And Danielle, for all her ambition and calculation, had never thought to ask what kind of work a logistics man actually did before he met her. What happened next cost her the job, the lover, the social standing she had curated for a decade, and the home she thought was already in her name. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was still hot. Marcus sat at the kitchen island he had rebuilt 3 summers ago, every cabinet faced, every drawer gliding smooth, and watched the morning come in through the east window. The light moved across the countertop in a slow diagonal, the way light does when it has nowhere urgent to be. He held the mug in both hands the way his grandmother used to hold hers, and for a moment the house felt like what it had once promised to be. His grandmother, Vera, had raised him in a small brick house in East Charlotte after his parents separated. She was a compact woman who spoke carefully and wasted nothing. She kept a garden that produced more than she could eat, and she gave the rest away without fanfare, the way she gave most things. She used to say, "Boy, you don't show a man everything you know until you need him to know it." He had not understood it fully at 14. He understood it completely now. Marcus ran a regional freight coordination company called Wynn Logistics that moved industrial equipment across 6 mid-Atlantic states. He had started it 11 years ago with a used box truck, a commercial license, and 3 clients he had inherited from a retiring dispatcher who trusted him. The company now had 12 full-time employees, 2 subcontracting crews, and a warehouse off I-85 that he had leased for 4 years and was now 6 months from owning outright. He managed everything through a quiet office attached to the warehouse, and a laptop he kept in his truck. None of this was visible from the outside. The trucks carried no logo. His business card just said his name and a phone number. His grandmother had taught him that, too. She said a man who needed a sign to tell you who he was hadn't earned the right to one yet. The kitchen island he was sitting at had taken him 3 weekends to rebuild properly. The previous owners had installed it crooked and not noticed, or not cared, and Marcus had cared. He had pulled it out entirely in September and reset the anchor bolts and refinished the surface in a pale gray concrete look that Danielle had initially called too industrial, and then, when guests complimented it, stopped calling anything at all. He had met Danielle at a fundraiser for a Charlotte literacy organization 7 years ago. She was the events coordinator at Alderman Cross Capital Management, a mid-size investment management firm whose downtown office occupied the 11th and 12th floors of a glass tower on South Tryon Street. She wore a burgundy dress and argued comfortably with a city councilman about zoning policy, citing numbers with the calm authority of someone who had done her reading. Marcus had found that immediately compelling. He introduced himself. She shook his hand and sized him up the way she did with everyone, assigning a provisional value he would understand later, and decided he was safe to be interested in. She was warm and quick, and she laughed at the things he said without amplifying them, which he appreciated. They were married 18 months later in a small ceremony at a botanical garden outside the city, and Vera had stood in the front row in a yellow dress and cried in the way women cry when they are happy and preparing themselves at the same time. 4 years of the marriage had been good. He still believed that. The next 3 had corroded slowly, in the way structural damage does when it starts where you can't see it. The trouble announced itself subtly. A Saturday in February, she told him she was going into the office for a quarterly budget review. He was sanding a section of the back deck at the time and nodded without looking up. That evening, he noticed the mileage on her car was 12 miles more than a round trip to her office would account for. He noted it the way a man who built things notes a measurement that doesn't match the blueprint. Quietly, without conclusion, and with the clear intention of measuring again. He filed it. He said nothing. 3 weeks later, she came home from what she described as a teen dinner, carrying a warmth that was not the warmth of a woman who had spent the evening with coworkers. It was a slightly different frequency. He had known her long enough to hear it. There was a new scent underneath her perfume. Something cedar adjacent that was not her product. She talked easily over dinner about a client presentation scheduled for next week, and her eyes were clear and her voice was steady, and none of that told him anything except that she had practiced. He mentioned it to no one. He kept his observations in a small notebook in his truck, in shorthand only he could read. The second measurement came 11 days later. Danielle left her work phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. Marcus was not the kind of man who went looking. But the phone lit up while he was standing 3 feet from it, and the notification preview was visible without unlocking. Last night was everything. Don't let him make you feel guilty. You deserve this. His hands did not shake. He looked at the counter. He looked at the phone. He looked at the counter again. He heard the shower still running, and he walked to the garage and stood in the cool dark for 4 minutes. Then he walked back inside, poured his coffee, and sat at the island. He did not ask her about it when she came downstairs. He said the deck boards were looking good, and she said that was wonderful, and they ate eggs across from each other like any other Sunday. That night after she fell asleep, Marcus sat in the garage with a yellow legal pad and wrote down every date he could remember in the past 3 months that had carried a small, unexplained weight. Late meetings, changed plans. A new perfume she hadn't mentioned buying, a hotel points email that came to the shared account for a downtown property 8 miles from her office. He had 17 entries before he stopped counting. Over the following 3 weeks, he moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his decisions. He did not confront. He documented. He found the second phone on a Tuesday, a newer model, tucked behind a shoebox on the top shelf of the hallway closet, powered off. He did not touch it. He photographed its position and the surrounding shelf from 2 angles, then put the closet back exactly as he found it. He stood in the hallway for a moment after he pulled the door shut, listening to the ordinary quiet of the house. And then he walked downstairs and poured a glass of water and drank it at the sink. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his professional decisions. In logistics, you did not respond to disruption until you understood the system well enough to know where the real failure was. Reacting to the surface symptom was how you made expensive mistakes. He purchased a small, licensed keylogger device, legal in North Carolina when installed on a shared household network, and connected it without incident one evening while Danielle was at the gym. Within 9 days, he had access to enough message threads, shared calendar entries, and browser history to understand the full shape of the arrangement. The man's name was Preston Akers. He was a senior portfolio analyst at Alderman Cross, Danielle's own company. He drove a black BMW leased under the firm's corporate account. He was 44, divorced once, and had a reputation, according to what Marcus was able to establish through professional network queries and a background service he'd used for vendor vetting for years, as a man who preferred relationships with women already attached to other commitments. It reduced the expectation of permanence, Marcus supposed, in a way that suited a certain kind of man. He and Danielle had begun their arrangement 11 months ago, 3 weeks after she had taken on the position of Director of Client Operations, a promotion. Marcus would later confirm through a contact at the firm that Preston had directly championed before the managing partner, citing Danielle's client relationship skills and her potential for expanded responsibility. He had advocated for her advancement and leveraged her gratitude into something that served him. Marcus filed that detail separately. It would matter later. He sat with a bank statement printout on the kitchen table one evening after Danielle was asleep and cross-referenced 14 months of shared account activity. She had been incrementally redirecting household expenses, utility overpayments, grocery reimbursements, a contractor charge that never corresponded to any actual work, into a separate account he was not on. The total moved over 14 months was $38,400. Deliberate, patient, invisible to a man who was not looking. He was looking now. He opened his laptop and created a new folder. He named it simply Vera, his grandmother's name. He moved everything into it and started making calls. He called Patricia Osai first. She had been his family's attorney for 9 years, a sharp, deliberate woman who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not waste a sentence on anything that hadn't earned one. He met her at her uptown office on a Thursday morning and set a manila folder, a USB drive, and a printed timeline that ran to 6 organized pages on her desk without introduction. Patricia reviewed the documents without expression. She turned pages at a measured pace. Twice she made a small sound in her throat that Marcus, after 9 years of knowing her, understood to mean she had found something significant and was deciding what to do with it. "You've been careful," she said finally, removing her glasses and letting them hang on their chain. "I was raised to be. The redirected funds alone are actionable under North Carolina marital asset law. The total amount, the pattern of small increments, the timeline, this was deliberate, not careless." She tapped the USB drive with one finger. "Combined with a digital record and the pattern of deception, we have substantial leverage for the divorce settlement. We could pursue a civil claim for the funds separately." She set her pen down and looked at him directly. "But you mentioned something else when you called. Something about the firm." "I want you to look into the ownership structure," he said. "And then I want to have a conversation about completing something I started before any of this." Patricia looked at him with the particular stillness of a woman recalibrating what she thought she understood about a situation. Then she picked up her pen again. "All right. Give me 72 hours. She called back in 48. Alderman Cross Capital Management had been quietly in financial distress for almost 2 years. The managing partner, a man named Gerald Alderman, was 71 years old and had been looking for a structured exit. The firm had been listed through a private broker, not publicly, not in any trade publication, for 14 months. The asking price had been adjusted downward twice. The current listing placed it at $4.2 million for full operational transfer, including its client book, its office lease, and its staff of 19. Marcus had known this for over a year. He had begun researching Alderman Cross 8 months before he found the phone in the closet. Not because he suspected Danielle, but because the firm managed a portion of Wynn Logistics' employee retirement accounts, and he had noticed 2 small administrative discrepancies in 8 months that suggested internal friction. He was the kind of man who investigated friction. He had authorized his financial advisor to open preliminary acquisition conversations with the broker the previous fall. By the time he found that notification preview glowing on Danielle's phone screen, the deal was already 70% structured and waiting on final due diligence. He had not told Danielle, not because he was hiding it from her, because he was an engineer by training and by instinct, and engineers did not announce the building before the foundation was confirmed sound. When the deal was done, he would have told her over dinner at the kitchen island he'd refinished himself, in the house they shared on an ordinary evening. That was the plan that used to exist. He authorized Patricia to complete the acquisition and notified his financial advisor to proceed. Preparation was the work. Everything else was just follow through. He called his Uncle Raymond the following Saturday morning and drove out to Concord. Raymond was 67, a retired postal supervisor with large hands and the habit of watching a man's face when he listened rather than looking away. He had taught Marcus to drive a stick shift in a parking lot off Highway 29. On the same afternoon, he had taught him that a man who talked when he should be thinking was giving away more than he knew. They sat on Raymond's back porch with sweet tea, and Raymond listened to all of it without a word. When Marcus finished, Raymond was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard. A cardinal moved through the hedgerow at the back fence and disappeared. Your grandmother used to say, you know what she used to say. I know, Marcus said. Then you already know what comes next. Raymond looked at him directly, the way men look at each other when they're talking about something that matters. The question I've got is whether you've got the patience to let the whole thing finish without jumping ahead of it. I've got the patience. Raymond nodded once. Then let it finish, all the way. Marcus drove home by way of the warehouse. He walked through it alone with the lights on, checking the progress on a mid-sized turbine shipment scheduled for Virginia the following week, making notes on a clipboard. The work was exactly what it always was. He found that settling. Some things you built for years before anyone could see what they were. That didn't make them less real. That weekend he came home and cooked dinner. A pasta with the tomato sauce his grandmother had pressed into him at 16, insisting he write it down. He set the table. He poured wine. When Danielle came in from what she described as a team dinner, 40 minutes later than she'd said she would be, he handed her a glass without comment and asked about the client presentation she'd mentioned. She kissed his cheek. She said the presentation was going well. She asked about his day, and he gave her 3 sentences about the turbine shipment, and she nodded in the way people nod when they are not listening. She was performing for an audience that existed only inside her own head. He ate slowly. He was very calm. Real power operated in quiet rooms. The closing on the Alderman Cross acquisition was finalized on a Tuesday in March. Marcus signed the transfer documents in Patricia's conference room. Gerald Alderman arrived with his own counsel and shook Marcus's hand for a long moment, looking at him with the slightly dazed expression of a man who had expected a larger and louder presence. He said he hoped Marcus would take care of the staff. Marcus said he had every intention of doing exactly that. He had already reviewed the 19 employees' tenure records and had a plan for the transition that protected all but one position, one that would manage itself in time. Gerald did not ask whether Marcus had a personal connection to the firm. Marcus did not volunteer it. That afternoon, the firm's employees received a company-wide memo announcing the transfer of ownership and stating that further communication about leadership and operations would follow within 30 days. It was a standard memo. It said his name once, in the footer, as the contact for questions. Danielle called him at 5:17. "Did you hear what happened?" Her voice was pitched slightly higher than its normal register, the register of a woman managing a problem. "Tell me," he said. "The firm was acquired today. No warning, no announcement. Nobody knew until Gerald just signed it to someone and sent a memo. Preston didn't even find out until this afternoon." She paused. "It's a complete mess. Nobody knows who this person is or what they want." "That sounds stressful," Marcus said. He was standing at the warehouse, watching the last truck pull out for the evening. "Do you want me to pick up dinner on my way home?" She said yes. He picked up dinner. He set the table one final time. The reckoning was not planned for a lobby. That was Danielle's addition. Marcus had arranged a formal meeting for the following Thursday morning in Alderman Cross's 12th floor conference room, a standard new ownership introduction session with the senior staff. He had told Patricia to arrange it through the firm's internal calendar, so it looked like any other leadership meeting. He had planned to walk in, introduce himself, and let the rest arrive at its natural conclusion in that room, with its documented witnesses. What happened instead was that Danielle arrived at the building early for what she believed was a private meeting with Preston about their options under the new ownership. Preston had apparently told her that he had a contact who could arrange an introduction to whoever the new owner was, that they could position themselves favorably before the transition solidified. She arrived in a charcoal blazer and heels, and the controlled confidence of a woman who believed she was still 3 steps ahead. Marcus arrived at 8:47 in slacks and a clean white shirt, carrying a leather portfolio. He said good morning to the lobby attendant by name, because he had taken the time to learn it. Danielle was standing near the elevator banks with Preston when Marcus came through the front doors. The moment arranged itself in a quiet half-second. Her eyes found him, and something shifted in her expression. Relief first, automatic and marital, then recalibration, then a kind of brittle resolve. "Marcus." Her voice had the careful lightness of someone doing arithmetic behind their eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I have a meeting," he said pleasantly. Preston looked at him the way a man looks at something he considers minor. "This is a restricted floor," he said. "You'll need to be cleared by reception." "He needs to leave," Danielle said to the security desk, her voice dropping to its authoritative register. "He doesn't have business here." The attendant at the desk, a young man named Darius, whom Marcus had spoken with twice during pre-acquisition walkthroughs, looked at Marcus with recognition and then looked at his screen. He kept his face neutral. "Sir," Danielle said. Louder now. "I'm the director of client operations. I'm asking security to remove this man from the premises." Preston stepped slightly forward. His hands were in his jacket pockets. The posture of a man who believed the room was already arranged in his favor. Marcus set his portfolio on the reception desk, opened it, and withdrew a single document. He placed it face up on the desk. It was a 2-page corporate ownership transfer certificate, filed with the state of North Carolina, bearing his name on the signature line. "Darius," Marcus said, "would you confirm the name on that document for me?" Darius looked at the document. "Marcus A. Wynn," he said evenly, listed as sole owner of Alderman Cross Capital Management. The lobby held its sound. Preston looked at the document. Then he looked at Danielle. Then he looked at Marcus with an expression Marcus had seen before, not on dangerous men, but on men who had just realized the ground was not where they thought it was. Danielle's jaw set. "That's not," she started. "The conference room is ready on 12, Patricia said, stepping out of the elevator behind Marcus, her briefcase in one hand and a folder thick with exhibit tabs in the other. "We have Gerald on the phone for the first 10 minutes if anyone has questions about the transfer." 3 senior staff members who had arrived for the meeting were standing near the elevator bank now, watching. Danielle looked at Marcus. Her expression moved through several rooms: anger, humiliation, a last calculation, before settling into something that wanted to look like calm and did not quite make it. "I want to talk," she said. "Just the 2 of us." "There'll be time for that," Marcus said. "Through our attorneys." He picked his portfolio up from the desk and zipped it closed. "What I need from you this morning is your access badge, your company laptop, and a forwarding address for your personal effects." He said it the way a man delivers a logistics instruction, not unkindly, not with heat, simply as the next step in the process. "Patricia has paperwork for you on the personal matter as well. You'll want to have your own counsel look at it before you sign anything." Preston said nothing. Danielle said nothing. Marcus turned to Darius. "Thank you," he said. He nodded at the senior staff near the elevator and said he looked forward to meeting them properly upstairs. He stepped into the elevator. He did not look back. Some things, he understood, were built on the wrong foundation from the start. An engineer didn't get angry at a wall for failing. He documented the fault, removed the bad material, and started the grade from clean ground. 9 months later, Marcus pressed the last board of a new deck into place at a house on the south side of Charlotte, a single-story Craftsman he had purchased in August, and spent the fall restoring. The yard had a Japanese maple he'd planted in October, just beginning to hold its shape. 2 raised beds ran along the back fence, already planned for spring. A woman named Celeste sat on the back steps with a mug of coffee, watching him work. She was a landscape architect who had recently left a large firm to start her own practice, and she had asked very good questions the first time they talked, and had not performed for him at any point in the months since. She did not fill silences that didn't need filling. Marcus found that profoundly restful. "That's level?" she asked. "Grandmother would have checked it twice," he said. "So I do, too," Celeste smiled and looked out at the yard. The morning light came through the maple in small pieces. The news about Danielle had reached him through Raymond in October. She had resigned from Alderman Cross the same week the formal divorce papers were served, resigning being slightly cleaner than the termination that would otherwise have followed the discovery of the redirected funds, which Patricia had formally reported to the firm's compliance function as part of the acquisition review. The civil filing was still pending. She was living, according to Raymond, in a rental apartment in Gastonia, working an administrative position at a property management company. Preston Akers had left the firm 2 weeks after the lobby incident, following an internal review that surfaced a pattern of boundary violations the firm's previous ownership had managed quietly for years. He had relocated to Virginia. Marcus had heard his name once more after that, and not since. Danielle's mother, a woman named Carol who had come to their wedding and sent Christmas cards every year, had not spoken to her daughter since learning the full shape of what had happened. That was the detail that had landed, when Marcus heard it, with more weight than any of the financial pieces. He registered it. He did not dwell on it. He drove the last nail and stood back and looked at the deck. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.